Ramona, darling. This is the first time in weeks I have had a chance to sit down to a real table and write a letter in quiet comfort. And it may be the last opportunity to for some time, because I will be living in a tent for a while after today, maybe for a long time. There are dangers in this business, and I am not shirking my share of them, but I feel I'll come through all right. All my love, Bill.
This is January the 21st. Kensington struck fur has stopped by to spend the night with us, and as we often do, somebody comes around from the family, we like to talk a little bit about family and other things. These tapes are primarily to have for the children, grandchildren, etc., etc., etc. And of course, I'm Bill Carrigan, the guy that lives in this house, and uncle to Chuck. So now on you'll hear all kinds of things.
I'm Chuck Furr. I'm retired but living here in Kailua, Hawaii. I am a nephew to Bill Carrigan. There were 11 children in my family, and my mother unfortunately was burned to death in 1949, and 4 years later my dad remarried a widow lady with 4 together. They had 2, so that's 17. Well, my uncle, we call him Bill Carrigan, but his officially is William M. Carrigan. My first experience about him was just a little vague knowledge through my mother from letters that might come in occasionally, but I was a pretty young youngster. Through her, I had very cursory knowledge of a man named Padre Pio. You must understand, this is long before he was canonized as saint. But it got profoundly more significant after the tragic death of my mother in 1949. We had no electricity on the farm in Minnesota, and a man had delivered kerosene to our 30-gallon barrel, but he had delivered gasoline to a previous farm, and it turns out there was only one hose system, and we didn't know this at the time, but he did not empty all of the gasoline out of that hose. And I'm the young lad that at age 11 had carried the 5-gallon bucket up to the house. We figured probably had maybe 3 gallons in it. And normally my mother would have poured some of that into like a bean can and take it to the wood stove to start it. But she'd awakened and realized she had not frosted a cake for my oldest sister had a girlfriend over for the night. So she got up to do that, and she just took the entire can, went to the stove, and when she poured it, it actually blew up on her. She died about 48 hours later of severe burns. Uncle Bill Carrigan came from Washington, D.C. area to Minnesota for her funeral. That was the first time I had ever met him.
Ought to give a good, detailed story of life right after your mother's death. Your mother was like a maypole with invisible ribbons running out to each one of you. She'd gently pull you back into line once in a while when you get tangled up with the others. That was a very critical time. I was trying to keep you all in line from Washington, D.C. You had your rules and regulations, house rules, chore rules. Everybody had something to do that they had to do regularly. I think you were the one that kicked up the dust a couple of times.
No, you told me that a couple of occasions,
Yeah.
but I don't have really much recollection of that. I had a recollection of a very significant void, after having lost one's mother at that age.
And that's why I was very careful to explain the situation to you, because it is the younger kids that, after the shock, after a while you begin to feel that void. And I felt that was what happened to you and Margaret.
So when my mother passed, that evening after the funeral, in the school auditorium, my uncle gave a talk on Padre Pio. And of course, I think, I was so young and probably distraught with the death of my mother. I don't remember much of that talk, but it was a foundation for things that happened afterward. Later in life, I got to know him better. Sometimes I would get to the D.C. area. I would always try to visit with my uncle. Often I'd stay with him, and I always cherished every moment I had. It was always instructive, always challenging. Through him, I learned more of Padre Pio, and then later in life, I became his guardian. My Uncle Bill was my mother's brother. They grew up on a farm in Iowa, then later in Pipestone, Minnesota area.
He told me that when he was growing up in Iowa, his dad trained him or gave him the responsibility to make sure there was always firewood in the fireplace. So it was his job to cut the wood and bring the wood in and make sure in the winter, Iowa has tough winters, that there was always plenty of wood. So he told me that one day he had forgotten to do this and there was a blizzard.
It was a different world, a very different world. One night, I went to bed and forgot to bring in the kindling wood. Dad came in and he had a lantern in his hand. He called me Billy. Billy, where's the kindling wood? We had banks of snow in the woods, 6 feet high, very cold, well down in the creek. And the wind was blowing through the woods, and the singing of the wind through the night. But with the lantern, I could hardly see anything. But I had to go out there and climb into the trees. That was the longest night I ever had in my life.
Some might think that was a little harsh, but I think he learned that lesson of being responsible and being determined. And if you have a job, you get it done.
They had meager days back then.
He would wait by the train station as a kid and talk to the caboose director and offer to wash the caboose windows for 5 cents. So he had several rags, newspapers, a bottle of liquid, and that's how he made, his money as a little child.
My darling, if the people at home could see and feel some of these things that I do, when boys who have been here for a month without anything but army rations day in and day out ask you for 2 donuts or a package of cigarettes or a razor blade or 1 or 2 of any of the thousands of things they were used to at home, damn, they would have a different spirit towards those things.
He described to me, as a young boy, participating in a greased pole contest where they would, goop up a tall telephone pole like something or other. And at the top was a coin, a gold coin, a silver coin, I don't know. But he said that he watched the young men trying to climb one over the other, and after a while, all the grease was gone. And as they were getting closer and closer, he stepped up and climbed up and over the shoulders of everyone and got the coin. And I thought, wow, well, he's a very competitive fellow. This is somebody you want to watch out for.
My dearest, darling wife, I have just received my first letters in Africa. I'm up to very much in work. I hope to go on to Sicily as soon as they will let me. But I guess everyone wants to do the same, as I will have to wait my turn. But I hope to get on there soon nevertheless. Darling, last night I was out in the country by a river with mountains all around and the moon was very bright. I stood there a long time watching the sky and the beauty that surrounded me. I am in darkness long before you. But darling, look to the evening sky and most likely I'll be seeing the same stars at the same time, especially the North Star and the Big Dipper. Your Bill.
You just felt so comfortable talking with him, and he would just start telling us things about his own upbringing a little bit, because then he started talking about apples in Washington State. And I'm like, oh, but you were from the Midwest or something, because he was telling us different things. And I said, how did you get over there? And he said, you got to live. You got to work. So he started to explain how apples grow and when you know they're ripe. And as funny as that sounds, that has stuck with me.
After a nomadic life as an apple grower, Bill began attending the University of Arizona as an archaeology and geology student.
My darling, my overseas letters must be just beginning to reach you now. I hope it hasn't been too difficult for you, my sweet. It has been much worse for me than I had anticipated. Sometimes I am tempted to resign and go back to you. I have recently visited the ancient city of Carthage. It was the first thing in Africa that has really thrilled me. My darling, I love you and miss you. Bill.
After growing restless in the West and struggling with an environment at the University of Arizona he felt was unfriendly toward his Catholic faith, Bill headed east to attend the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he began to study for the Catholic priesthood.
He demonstrated his love of the Lord and other people in projects.
Very intelligent people, is my experience, is they're just very sincere.
The application of knowledge is the real test of character.
He worked with this orphanage. They needed something to enjoy at the same time, burn off their energy in the summertime. And they didn't have a swimming pool, so he recognized that need.
So Mr. Carrigan decided they're going to have one. And he pulled together resources that in the midst of a depression, no one would have ever thought would be able to create and have that project come to completion. And it did.
He actually tried to dig it out himself, but he saw it was too much. So he found contractors who would donate time with a bulldozer, others with the concrete to go around the pool, and the rest of it to get this made for the children to enjoy, cool off in the summertime. So that kind of was the beginning in my knowledge of his using his talents to help others. And he was big at that.
So I was still a student at the university, and we dedicated the swimming pool at St. Vincent's Orphan Home. And I built that pool in 30 days.
So he was very industrious, very creative, wasn't afraid of hard work. That dogged determination was something that struck me. I haven't met anyone that tenacious and persistent and determined. And I met him when he was 90, so I can't imagine what he was like when he was 30 or 40.
Somewhere I found out that I had a wonderful red light connection. It is the ability to doubt, a kind of fear of the unknown, a signal that all is not certain. It says to me, wait, something isn't quite logical, not clear. So check it out before you sign the contract, cross that bridge, take a job, and of course, before you choose to marry.
Bill left the seminary after 1 year, but continued to study to be a teacher. Eventually, a charming classmate in a yellow hat caught his eye. Ramona Newman, a local socialite and passionate educator, drew the attention of the ambitious former farm boy.
My name is Steve Kreiser, and I grew up here in Washington, Virginia all my life, and was friends with Mr. Carrigan and his wife Ramona from the time I was a little boy. She was always dressed impeccably, hair and just always fixed up, just perfect. Never saw her otherwise.
Aunt Ramona was a very, really sophisticated lady. She was a true lady. She was very devout Catholic.
I often think about the times before we were married. Remember the time you nearly kissed me when I was at the house on Randolph Street? I am so glad you did not. Our whole life might have been different if you had. I would probably have thought you a bit fickle and been afraid to know you any better. Maybe it was fate that stopped that kiss. Well, it was a kind fate, for it saved us for so many more joys that far exceed the joy that kiss could have afforded. Every kiss I have ever had since has been almost a sacrament to me.
My darling Ramona, love is a very strange thing, and it does very strange things to people. I have talked with many boys here, and believe me, if it wasn't for someone very dear back home, we would not have any difficulty dying in this war should the blast come. If you were not in the picture, I would ask for service in the front lines, as close to the dying and suffering boys there as I could get, and I'd take my chances, one with them.
Truly, darling, I feel that I was indeed blessed to fall in love with one in whose hands I could so confidently place my life. I remember frequently the dream I had of walking on the water with you and the great surge of confidence that flooded my being. That confidence was not experienced only in that dream, dear, but has been with me always.
My darling, I made a long and important business trip today, and from the nose of a B-25 medium bomber, I saw most of Sicily. The thoughts that surged through my mind were many and often poetical. Some were sweeping back 5 years to our wedding eve.
Remember that night well, for it was the last night I would ever be alone. Even with you so far away, there is still a feeling of having you with me. After all, marriage changes one. You can never again be just one person. You know I am in one sense a very independent person, and I wondered if I would really like belonging to another. Well, I not only like it, I love it. Of course, I think that is due to the fact that I really love the man I married.
September 3rd, 38 is when we were married.
My dearest love, as I write this letter, your lovely yellow roses are right by my side, and their fragrance fills the room. Darling, there is nothing that you could have thought of that would have pleased me as much as yellow roses. They seem to belong to us, and I am delighted that you remembered. Yellow roses, with all their rich golden beauty, are indeed symbolic of the love we bear one another and the rich, beautiful years we have had together. I am sending you a few rose petals from the lovely yellow roses. I send you my heart in a yellow rose petal. All my love, your Ramona. Just under a year before the Carrigans' first anniversary, World War II broke out in Europe. By the time the United States became embroiled in the conflict in late 1941, Bill Carrigan was nearing his 40s. He was deferred from the draft due to occupation and dependency.
He wanted to serve our nation, so he joined the American Red Cross, and then he got placed in North Africa and then later into Italy.
My darling, this morning I had a nice half hour in our little church. I could not help but pour out my love for Christ in the Blessed Sacrament for the very numerous blessings I have received from him. Everything I wanted out of life, for the most part, he has provided me. In my youth, I wanted to travel much. I did. I wanted to go to Arizona University. I did. I wanted to try the East. I did. I wanted to study for the priesthood. I did. I wanted to do an unusual thing for some orphan children. I did. I wanted a good wife. I found her. I wanted to be of real service to our boys at the fighting front. I'm here. What I go after, I get. But in all this, I found a very definite finger of God. In everything, even in failures, I have found him very much a part of it. To take care of one of those failures, I have prayed this morning for another wonderful thing to happen to me. This time, it involves you too. So, I must get your thoughts on the matter too.
My name is Janet Johnson, and I'm Chuck Furr's daughter and William Carrigan's great niece. I have fond memories of my great uncle. My Uncle Bill and my Aunt Ramona, they weren't able to have children.
Darling, I have asked our Lord to help me find 2 little orphan children of good birth and of holy parents, that we may offer them something of that life, education, religion, and happiness that they would have had not this cruel war killed their parents and ruined their home. Please don't assume that because I am strong-willed that regardless of what you think, I'll do what I want to. No, give me your true feelings on it.
They didn't have any children, but they loved children. Every time they were over here, I'd run over and see them. Typically, Miss Carrigan would have to give you a piece of cake or some cookies, a Coca-Cola or something.
And I remember her being very warm and very welcoming. Even though she didn't have children, she had that motherly instinct and made me as a kid feel really comfortable. I was 10 years old. I had a broken arm, right arm, and we went to his home, Avon Hall, and it had a pond in the front of it. It's a big, beautiful white building. So we had been up at the house for a little while, and then my uncle said, "Hey, do you guys want to go fishing?" And there was kind of a big hill, and we went down the hill, and I'm thinking, well, how am I going to fish? I've got this broken arm, and I'm right-handed, but he had these poles and just like fishing line. He's like, "Go ahead, just throw it in." And we threw it in, and got a bite, and we threw it in, and we got a bite, and these fish were just like coming. I'm like, how can this be? And later on, we found out that he had intentionally stocked the pond for my brother and I so that we could catch these fish, and then my Aunt Ramona made them for dinner that night.
Darling, you mentioned the possibility of bringing home a boy and a girl and asked me to give it some thought. In a way, I feel hurt by the suggestion, for it means to me that you have given up any hope of having a family of our own. It is a very deep problem to discuss, especially at such a great distance. There are many things to be considered. The one thing that I know would make me happy would be to plan on a family of our own. I'm wondering if taking a year out of our life at this time will make that an impossibility. It is a question that I ponder on at great length, and believe me, it causes me great sorrow. Beloved, the question of children touches a spot more tender than you know. You see, it is a bitter disappointment to me too. I do hope and pray you will understand how I feel. I am a poor hand at explaining my feelings, and that is a handicap. However, my dear, if you find 2 such children as you have in mind, I will pray that they will take the place of our own if it is God's wish that we have none of our own.
Darling, I'm very sorry about the letter regarding the children. I'll probably never find kids I like well enough anyway. So I think we might forget the whole episode. Darling, I'd come back in a hurry should I ever find my services here of little worth.
He was such a strong presence, and he had conviction, and it came across like in how he spoke, and so it kind of, he kind of took you back. And I think that with my Aunt Ramona, I think of a calming influence, a little bit like my mom to my dad.
I was a young employee for the Dow Chemical Company in Midland, Michigan, and I had found 3 young guys that were friends. And one evening, some nurses came in. I sat in a booth, and my friends knew them. I did not. But I go over there. I see this pretty little girl in there, but nobody introduced me. But a week or so later, these guys said, "Chuck, we made a deal with the nurses from the hospital that if we'd provide the place for a party, they would provide the music and the girls." So I went there, and here this same young lady is coming in with the victual. And I picked it up and helped her carry it in. We set it down, and I think I danced with her every dance that night. Marilyn and I got married in 1962. We drove to D.C. a couple of times. I took her mom and dad there one time, and on the way home to Middle Michigan, I said to her parents, "What was the best part of your trip?" And my mother said, "Your Uncle Bill Carrigan and Avon Hall." So Marilyn got to know Uncle Bill and Aunt Ramona better than many in my own family.
Ramona, darling. I was a typical unglamorous Red Crosser all day, and I liked it. The men and officers are a swell bunch, and very cooperative in anything I want to do. Naturally, there are problems, but none that I cannot lick so far, thank God. But I have him to thank anyway for everything that happens. It must be your masses and prayers that make things go as they do here for me.
He took care of the boys as American Red Cross would, supplied them with different things. He actually introduced some new things to the American Red Cross. He wanted them to have something from home.
My darling, I am all set up now. A modest donut business with a staff of 8 people in operations and distribution.
One boy was so burned, he couldn't really do it himself, so my uncle would actually crumble a donut and place it into his mouth for him. Well, later, it's kind of a funny story because a general in North Africa, that's kind of foolish, you know. And pretty soon he found out how the boys appreciated that taste from home. He said, "I need to get one of those donut machines too."
Ramona, darling. Africa is a thing of the past. Now I can tell you that after Casablanca in June, I was in Algiers, then to Bizerta and Matir, where I made and served donuts to the invasion forces for Sicily. During the campaign, I flew almost every other day to Sicily, carrying donuts and supplies to hospitals and evacuation setups. Then I was in the Tunis field office for a time. That rightfully was my African picture.
As the movement of the troops and the defeat of the Axis was happening, they moved into Italy.
Ramona, darling, it is Christmas Eve. Tonight, my world is in good order. Tonight, my mind is as near peace as it ever gets. Tonight, I know that your world is in good order, and that your mind is also at ease. I know all of this because we are one in love and in labor for the good of others. If I could reach across the world tonight, I'd hold you up between the heaven and earth for all to see what faith and love and God can do. I'd ask the angels of heavens to sing to you, and I'd ask the babe of Bethlehem to bless you, protect you, and increase your love for God and man. I'll really ask for nothing short of sainthood for you. Ramona, darling, I wish we could be together tonight. The joy of having you near me would make this awful war seem very distant rather than just over the mountain. My Christmas devotion tonight is for you and for peace in the world. May the Christ child really bless you. Love, Bill.
My darling, this war is a cruel and unnecessary thing, and little, if any good, can come out of it. Every man over there is the world and all to someone. And as I look at the new year, I am afraid this old world seems to be a pretty sick and sorry place. I am glad that the role you play is one of bringing comfort and solace to many, rather than one of violence. Bill, being separated from you has been a real sorrow, but it has been made easy as possible by you. Your very nature, your honesty and faithfulness, your thoughtfulness and love have made it possible for me to carry on many times when I was most discouraged and lonely. Ramona. Shortly after his arrival in Italy, Bill was promoted from assistant to full field director.
And that actually leads into how he got to meet Padre Pio.
Two soldiers told me that they heard of a Capuchin monk at a monastery in the town of San Giovanni Rotondo who had the wounds of the crucifixion in hands, feet, and side, and they wanted me to take them to Mass in order to meet him.
And it was a very, very memorable Mass in more ways than one.
They got there and it was a snowstorm, but they got there placed maybe 10 feet or so kind of behind Padre Pio on the altar. And at the time of the consecration, something happened that affected the rest of my uncle's life. It was so dramatic to him. He said Padre Pio would bite off the words like he was excruciating pain on the cross with Christ at the time of the consecration.
I am a witness to a saint in formation. I was totally convinced that here was a priest who had attained a state of sanctity, the like of which I had only read about, but never met before. I knew we had a destiny together.
Since Uncle Bill was so spiritually affected by Padre Pio, it became his mission to even take more American troops to his Mass.
GIs are well received at the monastery. When the services are over, Padre Pio takes the GIs into the cloister, back of the altar, and gives them his blessing. Everyone lingers, crowding around him, hoping for a look or a word from him. When he is particularly pleased with someone, he will break forth with a beautiful smile and pat the soldier on the cheek encouragingly and give him some complimentary words. The boys love him, and I believe he loves them. They ask for prayers for their own safety, for the safety of their comrades. They ask for prayers for the folks back home. They ask for his assistance for their loved ones who are ill or worried, and they ask him to pray for a quick and permanent peace.
My name is John Capobianco. I am the son of an Italian immigrant. My mother was 10 years old when she came to this country, and she came from the region that was in Foggia, which is not far from where Padre Pio was. So lo and behold, I am introduced to Mr. Carrigan, and I was fascinated. I was like, to me, these were stories of my childhood, and suddenly here was a man who knew him, met him, was blown away by him, and wanted to spend the rest of his life promoting his spirituality.
Ramona, darling, I love you. You have given me no end of joy in the knowledge of your love. Special graces are flowing our way. I fear sometimes the terrific force and responsibility of the flow of grace in our souls. Yet at the same time, I run forth for more, partly heedless of my ability to possess it. We have a saint very definitely on our side. Today, I took 70 men to him. Most of them received communion at his hand. I know joy was brought to many, and many will be stronger from here on out. Before I left, Padre kissed my cheek. I hope that saintly kiss has a worthy cheek.
I think Padre Pio definitely had an incredible impact on deepening his own experience of Catholicism.
He found him to be a very credible witness, and to me that changed his life.
Adding someone so deeply committed to the Catholic faith and love with Jesus Christ, so much so that he was given the great grace of bearing the wounds of Christ, that really reinforced the sense that the faith is true, the supernatural is real, and you have this man concretely living and offering his sufferings up.
And he knew him in a way that was beyond all of the hype.
My experience with Padre Pio was, you might say, quite personal. Padre Pio didn't have any language facility except what he called his very poor Neapolitan Italian. And he had a problem dealing with people, of course. And he tried to talk with people. We had many conversations when nobody was around. And I don't know just how we communicated, but we did.
My name is Father Michael Sliney. I'm a Catholic priest with the Legionaries of Christ. I've been a priest for 23 years. Spent most of my ministry here in the Washington, D.C. area. And I had the privilege of knowing Mr. Carrigan from 1990 to 1993 when I was still a seminarian. I would consider myself to have been pretty close to him. He would have considered me to be a friend. He was the Red Cross liaison in World War II. I think that made a big impact on him, and not just because he became close to Padre Pio, but he saw things that he didn't probably talk very much about.
My darling, and that is what you are and more. Our life is lacking only in physical communion and relationship. We are pretty much one spiritually, and in our thinking we are able to understand each other readily. But more, we agree in our understanding. There are many things we both wish for in each other, and all those things are in the perfection category. One of your last letters called for a utopian life for us. You forget we live in a very disturbed and disorderly world. Our life must be developed within a rotten world. In dressed-up sin and distorted virtue as daily environment, we must find our way to true virtue and love. But no matter what is on the outside, it is possible to run in the ways of God and enjoy the peace of a good conscience, if one learns the freedom of love. For in true love, there is no evil.
He shared one story with me that was very powerful, where when the American soldiers were going into Rome to take over Rome, they were ambushed by the Germans. A third, if not half, of this particular division was destroyed because they were going down this dirt road and Germans were on both sides of the trench and just gunned down like half the guys. And Mr. Carrigan had to deal with these men coming back from that experience. So he witnessed a lot of human suffering and a lot of death and carnage and devastation and evil. And I think he also saw the suffering of Padre Pio and how that suffering could be redemptive. I think that experience hardened him and toughened him and prepared him, I guess, to be the man of character that he became. You know, he touched the heaviness of a heart. I mean, he touched just people, young men dying in terrible ways, and men losing their friends and men losing limbs. And he was watching that up close and personal. I think that experience of suffering and pain and faith is an interesting insight that he had that few of us will have.
My darling Ramona, I had the morning mass and a little time again with my good friend. I am seeing profound changes everywhere, especially among those I have had a hand in sending to his masses.
It changed men's hearts. It changed men. If they were there with Padre Pio, it changed them.
Mr. Carrigan knew the profound nature of taking these boys up to meet him. The realization of what Padre Pio as a confessor was to these young men, that he changed hearts, that men were completely different when they left confession.
I've questioned myself about the permanency of this new strength, and somehow I think it will be very permanent. So again, I find in trying to help others to better living, I come through with the knowledge that I have gained far more than I put into it.
He just had a real strong devotion for Christ in the Eucharist. And I wouldn't be surprised if Padre Pio instilled that in him. The people I knew at Holy Redeemer Parish in Kensington would tell me they would see him every single day at Mass. The Eucharist is the most beautiful expression of Christ's love. I think having him come into you and live in you transforms you. And I think that really was the secret behind Mr. Carrigan's dynamism.
My last meal with him, the monastery, was in November 45. At the end of the meal, I took his spoon and asked him if I could have it. And he took the spoon away from me, but picked up his wine glass. And the monastery was so cold that we were allowed to wear our big overcoats, army overcoats, and there were big pockets in them. He put this wine glass in my pocket. But he did something else. There were still a few very wonderful Italian rolls at his table there. And he took one and sliced off 2 slices, and he blessed it and gave it to me. And he said, "With these, you will not want." And this Don Giorgio, this Hungarian priest, was on the other side, and he saw all this. So as we went out to the refectory, I said, "Well, what do you make of this?" Well, he said, "Padre Pio has worked out a lot of symbolism to convey ideas." And he said, "You shouldn't have any trouble with that one." And I said, "I get it. Body and blood of Christ. As long as you have this, you will not want." And I think that his statement was very true in my case. I just can't account for a lot of things that have happened in the last 40-some years.
My name is W. Shepherdson Abel. I work mostly in trusts and estates, which is how I got to know Bill Carrigan. He was a tremendously generous person.
He had the wisdom to see the movement after the war of Washington, D.C., moving out more into Virginia. And he would buy land ahead of that movement, develop it, put in culverts, roadways, and then sell it to another developer who would build businesses, houses, etc.
He made a good deal of money that way. He was sharp. He understood how things were in the world, and he also understood what it meant to live by faith in that world.
He was very creative, had a lot of ideas, like to draw pictures of things and ideas, put together deals. I think he liked to have a sort of challenges where he might give so much money if others could match it.
Money is no more than a tool to do things with. It never is the end. It is the means to an end.
I'm Clara Cohagen. I'm currently the Director of Development at Mount DeSales Academy. I'm an alumna. I graduated in 1978. There were only 48 other girls in my class. And it was a moment in time when each year there was always that possibility that we wouldn't be able to open the doors the next year. I think it was about 2 years or so after I graduated that it was the visitation sisters were told it was time for them to leave, to relocate. So that's when we became a private school, but still a Catholic school. And that's never wavered. And then the Dominican sisters were invited to come on board. Once they came on board and took over the administration of the school, it's just been a beautiful uphill growth each year. So back in the mid-'80s or so was when I jumped on board as Director of Development and my first time working with Mr. Carrigan. Then my daughter Catherine was born in '89, still stayed on for about a year, stayed on volunteering, and then I came back on board in 1998, was it 98? And so I've been here since then. That's continuous. So since that point till now.
And I'm Mark Cohagen. I actually started here as a full-time employee in 2004. I'm currently Director of Operations. Previous to that, I've done pretty much every single job in this school.
So from the very beginning, it was all about a relationship between Mr. Carrigan and myself. It was always this beautiful friendship that transcended any type of monetary exchange. It was always a matter of helping this school to grow.
My name is Dr. Timothy O'Donnell. I am the president here at Christendom College. As this July, I'll be finishing my 30th year as president. I'm chief administrator here, but also God has blessed me that I'm able to continue to teach, so I teach in the theology and the history department as well. I was teaching at a large Jesuit university, but Dr. Carroll, who I had met, who was founding this college, said to me, even before I got my doctorate in theology, I'm establishing a college and I want you to be there. And it's a nice thing to be wanted, especially when you're pursuing an academic degree. And he kept writing me saying, please come. And so we went out and we visited. When we came out here, the college was very small, very, very simple. But when I sat in on the classes and I saw students who didn't care about a lot of the superficial things, but really wanted an education, I never thought I'd be teaching that for the next 30 years, but that's exactly what happened.
And I am the executive director of gift planning and have been for the past several years. I started out in admissions in 1992 and kind of gravitated towards advancement work in 1995, which is when I met Bill Carrigan. The college had nothing in the late 70s. We became aware of this campus. Price was $475,000. We talked that down to $275,000. $275,000 was too much. We couldn't afford anything.
The college had virtually no endowment, virtually no money, and was very, very small. No bank would loan us the money. It's a real credit to Mr. Carrigan that he helped us at the beginning of the college. And I think that also included everything from the sewage treatment plant out here to Campion Dormitory, to the property itself.
The agreement was Bill would loan us $200,000 if the college could raise the down payment of $75,000. He wanted to see us, bleed a little bit, and that was what the deposit was demonstrating. He would do the rest. we bought the campus, the college started to grow, and in 92, Dr. O'Donnell took over as president, and he began in a very detailed way to make the college beautiful, so that by the time Bill came on campus and he would see things, I believe he saw the growth.
He talked a lot about God's love in action. And I think if anyone lived it, it was him. He was always active, and always loving. And he was just a rugged, good man who was not pretentious. He was very down to earth.
It was, for me personally, it was always a deep friendship and a love of Mount de Sales that the two of us bonded. And it was simply a matter of, what's next? The phone would ring and we'd be go, oh, that's got to be Mr. Carrigan. So I would get myself situated on the sofa, pick up the phone, and Mark would bring me a glass of water. And that's where I would perch for a few hours to talk to Mr. Carrigan. And normally it was hearing a story again. One of them, I would listen to him a million times over. And his dreams and his, hopes for Mount de Sales and for the girls. And it was just really a joy. So it started with little things like making sure the girls had apples and oranges at Thanksgiving. We'd go, I'd buy the bags, and he would supply bushels and bushels of apples and oranges.
Somehow he would pack this little station wagon, and it was always a little station wagon. And he would come down, and it would be quite an adventure because I had a packing house because I grew apples down in Sperryville. And he would come up and he would pick out sometimes, or we'd have them picked out bushel boxes of apples, and he'd probably get about 30 in his car. And then he'd go tooling back down to DC.
He would give, we had so many apples. He would always be giving us bags and bags and bags of apples. That was his way of giving a gift. And it was very tender and very beautiful, and he felt very strong about that. That was one of his trademarks. Just like Ronald Reagan was a jelly beans, Mr. Carrigan was apples.
It would be like a couple of hundred in a box because they were that size, or 150. So he might have 4,500 apples.
And I can remember us being down in the kitchen. He'd make sure you wash them before you give them to the girls. And each girl got a bag, and it had to be a specific type of bag. And the girls would thank him that this was like their family. They wouldn't have had this delicious, opportunity for the oranges and the apples if it hadn't been for this gift. And then every year he would ask whomever the principal was to ask the teachers at the final luncheon for the year to write down what they might need, and he would try to fulfill at least one need that each teacher had. He just wanted to help and support an amazing faculty. And then it grew into the bigger thing. So the need was a renovation and a new science wing. So he made sure that he took care of all of that.
He did so many other things. He did the asphalt driveways. He smoothed the path for people to actually enter the property and come to school.
And the girls, every time he was here, the girls just loved the fact that he was on campus and they would get to see him. That was a tradition. Every year, Mr. Carrigan would come and do his Padre Pio talk, which was absolutely beautiful and greatly appreciated.
In the spring of 1944, Bill wrote an article for the Catholic press describing his personal mission of bringing American soldiers to Padre Pio. During the summer, while on leave visiting his wife back in the United States, Bill gave the first of many speaking tours on his experiences in Italy. Bill returned to his Red Cross work in the autumn of 1944. By the time of his return to Italy in late October, the monastery at San Giovanni Rotondo had begun receiving an influx of international mail.
Ramona, my darling, I've had 2 letters today on Padre Pio, seeking his help. I'm sure he will receive many letters directly in due time. I'm very glad I've had a part in telling America about him. It has been a sacred privilege.
His mission was to make Padre Pio known in the Western world. And this is before television and email and all of that. He gave over 500 talks.
He touched everyone's heart with the stories, with his personal relationship with Padre Pio.
I've had people come up and say, well, you've made Padre Pio alive for me. I feel I was there. I feel I know him.
Ramona, darling, it is interesting. Padre Pio is getting letters directly, and through the Vatican, and through me, from people in the U.S. All mention the articles in the Catholic press. One letter came to him addressed to him through Mr. William Carrigan, A.R.C. They had quite a laugh on that one. The letters all seek masses and prayers. I am very happy to realize my article has reached the hearts of our people.
We invited him out to the college a number of times. He gave a great presentation on Padre Pio to our students, and a number of students were deeply affected by it. And I said, well, why don't you write him back? And a number of them did write back, just thanking him. And so that began this real kind of love affair on a deeper level with the college.
Him allowing us to be on that journey, even if it was just through storytelling and friendship. It was just a beautiful aspect of the deep connection that he and Padre Pio had.
Yeah, very human connection.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just a divine connection, that you can look back at and say, well, that was divine intervention. This was a human friendship.
Yeah.
When I think of Mr. Carrigan, I think of, first of all, a very generous, determined man of grit. And just being in his presence, you sensed a real passion, a fire in him that was determined to do whatever Christ wanted him to do. And nothing was going to stop him.
At one point, we had a conversation on the phone where he related a dream. And he said, in this dream, which was extremely vivid, Padre Pio was holding an umbrella over top of the school. Clear message to Mr. Carrigan that before he did anything else, we needed a new roof, which was absolutely true.
Yep.
We were in dire need of a new roof.
Yep.
And Mr. Carrigan personally found the company. He wanted a standing seam metal roof that would look very much like the original. He loved historical buildings. He paid for that roof. And he gave me very specific instructions. Claire, at least once or twice while these men are up there in harm's way, putting this beautiful roof on to keep our building safe and our girls safe and secure, you go up there with some nice ice cold lemonade and make sure that the men who are up there working know how much you appreciate what they're doing. We have photographs of Mr. Carrigan going up in a cherry picker to look at the work.
Yep.
I didn't want to go up in the cherry picker, but Mr. Carrigan went up in the cherry picker. So he did. And it's beautiful. It's been many, many years. It's still there. But he was very clear in this very vivid dream that Padre Pio was telling him, I'm holding this umbrella over Mount de Sales. You need to put a new roof on this building, which is what he did. And I believe that Padre Pio wanted Mr. Carrigan here. And I think Mr. Carrigan understood that.
Mm-hmm.
I went to see Padre Pio last night, and it is always late when I return from there. Everyone is in need, and it's hard to decide where the charities should be given and who are worthy. It is difficult to give a little to many in need. I asked Padre to pray for assistance in allocating excess goods to the worthy and needy.
He was very much a gentle soul who understood the depth of spirituality and didn't take a lot of crap from a lot of people. I guess you can't say that.
Saturdays, Bill Carrigan would come down to Avon Hall, and he would have a series of appointments lined up, and it would be a series of people coming one right after the other to talk about these projects.
Many, many times people came here to hit him up for a loan, who would have some business deal they wanted to follow that dream and wanted him to be involved with his funds. And I think more times than not, he had to say no.
When I was first made president, there was a very large debt of about over $500,000, and the college had not been able to pay that off at all. And so one of my big challenges was to try to reduce that. And so I went over and visited him at his home in Maryland, and that began a whole series of visits where I would get to know him, thank him for the support he gave us, but then pleading with him, would you be willing to let go of this because it was a financial burden and a risk for the college.
And the thing that I remember so well is someone might come and he would talk to them about everything but what they came to talk about. And then at the very end, he might say, oh, you were here to talk about funding something. Oh, yes, that's very, well, we don't have time to do that now. But so then they might have to set up an appointment for the next weekend.
I adopted a healthy suspicion in dealing with people. It is a very good idea to take on a healthy suspicion.
So if you're in a hurry, it doesn't work. You have to not be in a hurry. And so that I learned from Bill Carrigan was to come over, let the conversation flow as it might. And then when he was ready, he would bring up the issue that he knew all along you came to talk about.
You know, he was his own person. He was a little idiosyncratic.
He was part of what you would call the greatest generation. He was part of that World War II generation. He did not suffer fools gladly. And so I think when I first came in, this sort of newly christened president from California, you know, he wasn't so sure, you know. And so it took a while, but the depth of the conversation eventually broke through, and I think a real friendship was founded. He was a character. He always had sort of a wry smile. He knew that I wanted him to forgive that debt, but he wanted to make sure that I was paying my dues, and I was happy to pay my dues because it was fascinating talking to him.
He had a presence and a charisma about him that made him stand out. And it's 32 years, and I don't have that vivid of a memory of that many people.
And he was a conservative in the best understanding of that term, that the good things that were in the past, the good things that are part of our patrimony should be guarded, protected, nurtured, and preserved, and then passed on as well. It became a wonderful personal friendship.
So I was involved in visiting with him at his home in Avon Hall. I actually went down to the 4th of July festival down in Washington, Virginia. That, of course, was Avon Hall.
I saw some really cool things in that old house. It was an ancient house. That particular summer event was a big deal, but he had just a great love for people.
For over 40 years, they did the 4th of July event at Avon Hall in Little Washington, Virginia.
That was his big hoorah every year, and he loved putting it on. And preparation for that started weeks before the actual 4th of July celebration.
That was pretty much his big event for the summer.
You know, we figured, it'd just be a little barbecue. We'll go to his house, no big deal. So we get in the car and we drive all the way down there. We're going down this road, and it's the time of maps, no GPS. We're trying to figure out where we are. And as we come around the corner, all of a sudden we see all of these people and all of this stuff going on. There were like tents, and there were, kids playing games and baseball and kicking balls around. And we drive into the driveway, and that was his front lawn.
They would have between 5,000 and 6,000 people on their lawn. They would have games for the children. He'd have prizes. I remember I had to help one time, and he had like silver dollars he'd give the children if they beat on a sack race.
We'd help run the kids' games, and I guess for some reason that was our expertise. So we'd have sack races and different things like that down by the pond. And
we'd go out there for the 4th of July celebrations, and he'd invite the whole family. We'd go into the house, celebrating the picnic, and the whole community turned out for what was really an incredible fireworks display that he put on. And it was part of his generosity, his patriotism.
The pageantry, the effort to make that house look like a 4th of July house with the American flags, and just the whole ambiance was unique. I felt like I was living like a 1940s 4th of July. He created this whole environment of pageantry and history and nostalgia. And it was a special event. I mean, anyone who went to that will tell you his entire lawn was taken over. I mean, people were just packed.
Not only were there fireworks, there was the band and the high school was there. The entire town was there for the celebration.
And people came from all over, not just from that area. They came from DC and from all over. It was almost like the Kentucky Derby. Mm-hmm. People would dress up and, kind of, look that part. It wasn't a beach day. It was like a special day.
We got invited to sit on the front porch at Avon Hall. And, we could come in and go through the house, but we would have these meals, and the Catholics and a few notables from the area would get to come up here and have a meal and then watch the fireworks from up right on the front lawn. And we considered that to be quite an honor to be invited to such a thing.
The house was open. We could go in. There was food. A lot of friends and just brought the food.
Everybody was there.
He just told us to come.
Just show up.
And he even used to buy the fireworks. They would be out there with their blankets, their picnics, again, family people, showing real patriotism.
And they would shoot fireworks over his pond right in front of the house.
At that time we had small children, and some of the smallest children would start screaming. They're actually terrified because the rockets, red glare, the bombs bursting in there. That literally is what happened. And so they started screaming, they'd jump into my arms. I said, it's okay, it's okay.
And he went all out. I mean, he had horses that were really beautiful. I think like Arabian horses are incredible horses. They offered horseback rides for little kids. That was one of the allurements.
In the early days, I believe there was Army crew come and set up tents, set up a PA system. A couple times they even flew a helicopter in here for people to look at, and that was his contacts, I guess, with some officers in the Army.
Everybody was there. You could see them all sitting down. And then he walked down to the microphone to actually do this part of it.
Yeah, Pledge of Allegiance and Gettysburg Address. And it was very meaningful. And once again, it was bringing everyone together, but keeping us focused on why we were there.
Yep.
And the importance of it. Mm-hmm. And it was the quintessential Americana 4th of July.
And there were plenty of hot dogs and plenty of hamburgers and plenty of chips. It was just an all-American day, with I think even a band and music playing too. So it was just a really cool, I looked forward to that event. That was special.
That was, I think, Bill Carrigan's personality. He was the host, but he was not the reason. He was the one that actually was able to make it happen. And so he did. His personality was to share everything he had with everyone around him. And he hosted this 4th of July celebration with everybody there. It was just phenomenal.
American flags and patriotism, and he loved our country, he loved people. I think he just embodied a lot of values that I think have been handed down, and hopefully we won't lose going forward.
One of the things that I remember distinctly about Bill Carrigan is this gentleness that he had. It's almost like, well, how can a person be this big, but be so gentle and so kind and so servant-oriented?
I guess the simplest way I can describe it is, the difference between a job and a vocation. A job is where you exchange time for money. That was not Bill Carrigan. I learned that by observing, if you will, the difference between the Greased Pole contest story, where he would clamor over people to get his goals, and the Bill Carrigan who actually took all the money at the Christendom College, was able to pay for interest on his loan, and took that money and used it for other purposes. Our money went to Mount Sales. And I thought, what a great story that was.
He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He had great focus and clarity.
He was a Catholic, he was a faithful Catholic, and he wanted to do the best that he could to advance Catholic education.
He used to say when he was young, and this is how he started making money, he said, this is when typewriters were all manual typewriters, right? And electric typewriters came out. And everybody started throwing away the manual typewriters. And because they weren't working as well, right? And he said, these typewriters are really still really good. It's just maybe one or two of the keys are not working as well. So he collected all these typewriters, and he fixed them. And he said, Mark, it's the little things that need to get fixed to make the whole thing work again. Because we took care of a lot of little things. He took care of some big things. So all of those big things he did were only based on all of the little things that added up. There have to be enough people doing all of God's work in these little things, and then we can cap it off and we can do something big. And that's what he did. He put the roof on. He capped it off.
So eventually, very much to his credit, he agreed to stop all interest payment. So anything we paid because the college had never been able to pay back, and so the interest had been accruing. So he forgave the interest. After he did that, he said, anything you pay will just be paying principal down. And so we did that because we want to thank him for the donation he gave. So the principal was being reduced. But then he also agreed, God bless him, that upon his death, the entire thing would be forgiven. And when he died in the year 2000, I think what was remaining was still well over $200,000. That was all forgiven. So we owe a huge debt of gratitude.
Charity can never be as great as love. Charity is only a part of love. There is much charity without love.
Anytime he spoke in front of any group that I would witness, it was always about Padre Pio. And not just about him, but about the message of Padre Pio. And the message of love for Christ, and the message of sharing that love, and the sacrificial nature of that love. Kind of in a way, living a crucified life. Like, love has to be sacrificial. Love has to hurt.
Ramona, my darling, it is nearly midnight and I just got in. I got out early and went to the forest 3 hours from here to direct the cutting and loading of several trucks with Christmas trees and holly. I got some for Padre Pio's midnight mass and left it off at the monastery on the way down. As Christmas nears, I think of you more and more in the midst of countless duties. Had I a turn of poetry to speak to you in music, I'd do it tonight. I am tired, and my mind won't put forth the effort to say what is in the heart. There is love and tender feelings deep inside which belong to you, and there is a struggle because it is impossible to tender them to you. Our married life and our love is being crucified by this separation, caused by a crucifying war which has the world upset and violently destroying itself without reason or knowledge of the result. Hate begets hate. Love begets love. Let us try to stay by the latter, even though we may have to live with the former for a while.
His love of Jesus, of his faith, that love was something that gave you the sense of strength.
My darling wife, we had several truckloads of men at Padre's Mass, in spite of a bad night and bad roads. Padre sang the Mass, and the Superior preached a short sermon ending with a Merry Christmas and God's blessing to us in English. Just before going into Mass, Padre looked over to me and smiled, and sometimes during Mass, he looked at me. He exudes love. Give my best wishes for the new year to all our friends, little and big, and my love to the family. Your Bill.
I think he was consciously trying to project God's love at all times. And he had just a tremendous capacity to listen. You felt you were the only person that mattered when he looked at you. He really seemed to care. And he wanted you to understand how much Christ loved you and how important it was that we share Christ's love with others.
I just feel like the friendship that I had with Mr. Carrigan was unique and extraordinary. And I was visiting the house in Kensington. We were saying goodbye and just having our normal conversation right in front of the front door. And I've never felt a hug like that ever again. I had never felt an embrace like that before. It really felt as if Jesus was hugging me, as if I was being just welcomed and loved and could feel that through this incredible, wonderful Mr. Carrigan.
He was always smiling. You always got a sense that he was up to something.
He had a great sense of humor, kind of a dry sense of humor. He would say things and kind of look for the reaction, and you would get the joke, and his smile was great.
Ramona, my love, I went to Padre's Mass today and received his ever-welcome blessing. He is so lovable, and he gives me so much attention when I go there. The place may be full of people, but he seems to give me time, asking for me sometimes when I cannot get through the crowd, and sometimes sending for me to see him after Mass. The love he radiates and the simple friendliness he shows brings tears to my eyes nearly every time I go to see him. I've asked him to do so many things, and I believe he does them as if they were his first concern. And I know that thousands seek him out. Oh, darling, I wish you could have the opportunities I have to share my experiences with this great man.
He and Ramona were such shining examples to all of us, and specifically to our girls, of what love looks like. There was this oneness that was kind of fluid throughout everything. And that speaks to a relationship and a marriage and a dedication to each other that is rare.
After returning home to the United States, Bill and Ramona kept up correspondence with their beloved Padre.
And those of us old enough to remember the end of the Second World War, many countries were just desolated. Italy was one of those. And Mark would send woolen socks, underwear, and pineapple juice. Padre Pio had a lot of weaknesses and he had some lung problems and things. And when he was ill, he liked Mr. Carrigan's pineapple juice. One of the communiques ended with a statement, Padre Pio remembers you in his masses, plural, each day, and considers you his best American friend.
In 1953, Mr. Carrigan and I went over to Europe, and we visited a great number of shrines, and I gathered a lot of material with pictures and wrote a number of stories in 1954 for the Catholic press.
Bill brought along his own car from America to drive his wife around Europe for long-awaited sightseeing. Bill was finally able to return to see his saintly friend in person again. During the visit, Padre Pio blessed the Carrigan's Pontiac, much to the amusement of his fellow friars.
Darling Ramona, these are really busy days for me. I just returned from an hour with Padre Pio, the first in nearly 3 weeks. I had a long visit with him. I asked about children again, and again he said for us not to adopt any. They would obstruct our vocation unless they were our own. So, if we have a family, they must be our own.
Bill and Ramona shared a love for the church.
Every year, they would sponsor or support at the school where she was teaching an art show. Mm-hmm. The children were encouraged to create religious art, faith-filled art. And then they had a relationship with a bank in downtown Washington, D.C. that the artwork would be displayed in. She was quite an amazing character. She really was. And I loved the stories that Mr. Carrigan would tell. When he would talk about her, he would light up. The one beautiful moment here at Mount DeSales was we were able to celebrate with the entire student body, faculty and staff, their 50th wedding anniversary. So she was here. It was lovely. We had cake. Mass was dedicated to them. It was just a beautiful experience for the girls to witness, but also another beautiful opportunity for me to interact with Ramona. I would go over and visit every now and then, and she would be there. Just incredible hospitality, just lovely. I know later that things became a little bit more challenging. He would take care of her as things, she began to decline and what that looked like, and how meaningful that was for me personally to see, and how beautiful that relationship was, and just a privilege to have been able to witness.
Ramona, sweet, I haven't told you in some time that I think a lot about you, and the love we have missed the last 2 years. We have had a platonic affair for the most part. Perhaps it has given us a little extra strength for days that are bound to come. The separation may have been very beneficial in the long run. We love each other, and not even an ocean, a war, nor anything interferes with it. God has given us much more than most people get. I love you, sweet, and I'm looking forward to the time we can again be together, which I hope will be soon. My love, Bill.
I want most of all to thank you for what you have done for Ramona during her 3 months of suffering. Your numerous prayers, your get well cards and letters, the academy masses, and many flowers. But most of all, you're giving a half day of school to sing a most beautiful mass at Ramona's funeral. This surely was God's love in action, a true spiritual event. You will never know what all of this did for Ramona and me. I had told her that you wanted to honor her by naming the new science wing after her. She smiled again, pleased. She had asked me before she died to be sure and thank those beautiful girls, teachers and sisters of Monticello for their prayers and gifts. She loved you.
It was a terrible blow when Ms. Carrigan passed away.
She was his heart. It felt like the sun definitely rose and set, on Ramona.
His reference to her was as if she was just in the next room. It was beautiful.
Memory is a strange thing, isn't it, dear? I seem to remember so many little things, like coming home one afternoon, right after we were married, and finding you in the attic working on the little desk. I can remember that afternoon and your kiss most vividly. Yet, it was just an afternoon. I guess life is made up of the dear little things that we love to recall again and again. I want to be happy again with you here in our little house. God bless you and keep you. Your Ramona.
Ramona, darling, I am a little weary. I need your caressing hand on my head and your soft lips on mine. And more, tonight, it cannot be tonight. We will live and love and spend our own short hour here. And then, as the leaves fall from the browned tree and are blown on and on until oblivion, we too shall return to the earth from whence we came. Our souls alone shall stay to tell where that oblivion is and raise the leaves again to life.
I think there was a solitude and a heaviness he carried. I felt that, and that was a year after his wife died. I do know that left a real deep mark in him. I definitely felt that he carried a heavy weight, that part of him was gone, and he was hurting. But it was a hard topic for him to talk about.
He was a very big part of our lives, really, in spite of the fact that he was about, I don't even know how old he was. Seemed like he was about 100.
He was a nice old man, very friendly, somebody that you would want to just sit and talk with. It was like everybody was his friend once you met him.
He was a voracious reader, and he was a pack rat. He had his magazines and books all over his apartment there. We could tell he was very well read and deeply knowledgeable.
And everything about him, he loved kind of this ornate history, even to the point where he would stack up historical things and they would just be piles of everything everywhere, right?
Didn't really know his wife. I think he had been widowed by that time.
He spoke about her constantly, in the sense referencing. Ramona would see this, she would not be happy with how this was. We got the sense that she was one who kept the house clean. And since she wasn't there, it was not clean.
I walked in, and it was like a Grand Canyon of magazines and pamphlets.
And it wasn't just cluttered, it was capital cluttered.
There was an order to the disorder in his mind. And I still remember he needed to mail a document, and he stuck his hand in the middle of this pile and brought out the document, and then he stuck his hand in another part of the pile and brought out some stamps. I thought, how did you know, Mr. Carrigan? He said, I know where everything is. And I think it shows his intelligence that he could remember where every one of these things were.
His immediate room was not the quintessentially neat room. And in a way that was endearing. It showed to me that He cared more about people than things.
He wasn't a superficial man. He was a very deep man, but he was a simple man. He had a lot of pains, I think, and issues, and he never complained. I never heard him be negative, and he bore his cross with great dignity.
You know, he was attacked one morning.
He was 94 years old at the time, and he spent the night trying to crawl to his neighbor's house.
He had come to our council meeting to talk about the 4th of July. It was going through some changes. The 4th of July was originated as a fundraiser for the library, which he was a charter member. And then some years later, Rappahannock Association for Arts in the Community took it over, and he had some concerns about, you know, it's on his property and the liabilities and making sure they had insurance. So he had come to our council meeting that night, and then when he got back to Kensington, somebody jumped on him, and they obviously had been waiting for him at the door. They found some cigarette butts, and the ivy was mashed down. I guess the next couple days later, 3 homicide investigators from the county up there came here, and one of their biggest questions, who gets the money from 4th of July? Follow the money trail, and but it was totally unrelated to anything here. They kind of put it together that it was a fellow who had done some work there in the house for him. It was what I remember from the time, that they thought it was an inside job.
And we visited him shortly after that, and that visit was remarkable because I saw no vindictiveness or nothing.
He really bounced back, but he was always joyful, you know, and he always had a smile on his face.
There was no anger in his heart over the attack.
And he was relentless, even though he was 90. You know, he was starting a tractor, which would take him 10 minutes. Literally, I watched him start and fail and start again and fail and start again and fail to get this tractor going in Avon Hall at 90 years old. And it took him forever to get up and get down, but he was going to start that thing, and he was going to cut the grass.
When I knew him, and until he declined in later years, he was always very positive, very upbeat, but very fixed on Padre Pio and the other charitable work that he was doing.
I think he was determined to make use of every minute of the life he had.
Don't think he lived but about half as long as he needed to get everything that he wanted to do.
Ramona, my darling, 2 years ago this day, I pulled away from American shores with feelings hardly within description. Whether my life is shortened or lengthened by these 2 years, I'll never know. But I do feel the rest of my life will be much better directed because of my 2 years here.
He told me all the time that Padre Pio had directed his life and was directing his life.
His life revolved around Padre Pio, probably even more so after Ramona died. When I knew him, that was his 100% focus.
He had a stack of negatives that he gave me and just said, look, I don't know what's on them. And he had taken pictures, I think it was in the 50s. And so most of them were unusable. But at the end of the roll, you know, lo and behold, there was a image of Padre Pio reaching into the chalice to pick out a host. He really broke down in tears when he saw it. And after that, he actually had a mosaic made of the shot.
He said to me numerous times, and I'm sure to all of the principals that he worked with here, that his desire and his dream would be for Mount de Sales to become the shining example of what a Catholic school can be and should be. And then to graciously grant us this incredible mosaic that just meant the world to him, and for him to gift it to us to live in the Padre Pio Library, it was just something that means the world to the generations of girls who have studied here and have had just been able to be a part of this beautiful space. And I hope we are honoring him every single day.
I knew that Bill had an incredible devotion to Padre Pio, and this beautiful statue, which was donated to the college. And so I said, I really need to bring in powerful heavenly aid when I talk to Bill. And so I took this out of the library and brought it to Bill. And he was absolutely delighted with this statue. He thought it was so beautiful. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to leave it with you so long as you give it back to us when you go to see Padre Pio in person. And so every time I would visit him, he'd have George, his cane on one side. So I have to pay obeisance to George, say, hello, George. But then he would always have Padre Pio, and he would always be touching him whenever he'd refer to him, would caress the statue.
He had relics in the house. He had thousands of prayer cards that he always brought with him. He was giving me personally hundreds of them, and I would find a way to give them out. And I did actually sleep one night in the house because I think he had fallen, and I think we were rotating different people who were kind of taking care of him. And it just struck me, I could hear the pitter-patter of him walking back and forth at like 2 in the morning and 3:30 in the morning. So I just really wondered if he ever slept. So that was just another, I'm not sure what he was doing, but I think personally he had some mystical connection with Padre Pio. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some communication, some relationship there that he had with Padre Pio, because it was that deep. There was a union there that was very powerful.
I became the guardian of my uncle in 1997. He had some dementia.
My dad was there for, I think, several weeks, and my mom was still here working. But then my dad was like, this is a really big deal. There's a lot happening. And my mom just kind of dropped everything, went out east to be with my dad.
When we went in to get a guardianship, the judge had him present, as you're supposed to do in Maryland in a guardianship. And at one point, he asked Mr. Carrigan, do you own a car? And Mr. Carrigan, who was about 96 at the time, said that yes, he'd just taken out an 8-year lease on a car. And the judge thought that was pretty funny, and so did I.
And during that time, the judge had told us we had to report back in 60 days. Marilyn had packed for 3 days. As a nurse, we had to have her in front of the judge showing that we could take care of his medical needs. And unfortunately for Marilyn, she saw that and she knew the big mess we had at the house. And she said, Chuck, I cannot leave you with this mess. I'm not going home.
I remember my mom saying that the dining room table, it was from like the top of the table to like almost the ceiling, just full. In order for my dad to take over the fiduciary responsibilities, there was not a ledger. I mean, it was all over this paper, and they took and read every piece of paper and organized it so that they could appropriately manage it.
I'd say her hand was often guided, I think, by Padre Pio. One time she pulled out a stock certificate worth $80,000. Young lawyer came to the law firm to help us for a couple hours just to see what we're going through. It took us 5 days just to clear his dining table and underneath it. And he said, well, Chuck, I think the law firm would have just hired a couple trainees in the summer. They would come out with plastic bags, took this to the street.
Uncle Bill was so generous. He loaned money or he gave people money. And my dad had to go and search down to get reimbursed for that because that was owed to the estate. And, his plan was to give everything to charity.
So Marilyn, unfortunately, had to resign a 40-year nursing career by telephone.
My mom was an amazing nurse. And although maybe at that time she was starting to think about retirement, never in a million years was her intention that she would go fly to the East Coast and get embedded into this and then just end her career over the phone. I think that takes an incredibly special person who would be willing to do that. Uncle Bill did a tremendous amount for all of my dad's brothers and sisters. This was, I think, their way of giving back to him. And my mom wasn't going to just leave my dad and say, hey, you know what, that's not mine, that's yours. I mean, they were partners. And for my mom to give that up, that was not easy for her, but she never complained about it.
But we got home 63 days later.
They didn't have to be the deliverers of his care. They needed to make sure that he was cared for and have the appropriate day-to-day overseen. And then with that, they had to come every so often.
They were great. Couldn't have been better. I mean, that's how I really got to know Chuck for the first time. And everybody should have someone who cares that much about him to come in when they're in need.
Well, Marilyn was a very vivacious lady. And this is her funeral story. And Everyone I know her said that is a perfect picture for her because she is smiling. And that was her nature.
My mom was amazing.
Marilyn and I were married for 43 years. I just feel very, very privileged that this lady would put up with me that long. But I never, ever had my wedding ring off in 43 years of marriage. But after she passed away, I tried it over here as some widowers do, and it didn't work. So I went to the bank vault, and I got out her 2 rings. So we belted them down, they're all right here. And she is with me always.
They don't have to know me. I have tried always to introduce Padre Pio as someone that they can go directly to, not through me.
He took my uncle at age 97 to Rome on May 2nd, 1999 for the beatification of his friend when he was named Blessed by Pope John Paul II.
Because of his faith and his connection to Padre Pio, my parents made sure that even though he was really elderly, he was really sick, they got him to the beatification.
We took my Uncle Bill and Pilar, his caregiver, and we needed someone that he knew and trusted, so we took Sister Philip Joseph, a Dominican nun whom he had helped at Monte Sales Academy, to show the impact Padre Pio has had on our family. Of the 11 of us original 3rd children, 9 were alive at that time. 5 of us went to Rome with our spouses to the beatification.
And I had Uncle Bill in a wheelchair. And so we were in the front row where the steps come down on the exterior of St. Peter's.
We could look up at the loggia, that's where the Pope lived inside, and there was our family waving to us. It was a gorgeous moment. There were over 300,000 people there. I think the largest crowd they ever had for the beatification. Due to his dementia, it is difficult to read really how Uncle Bill understood that, but I do think he knew his good friend was being recognized by the Catholic Church. After that was done, we took a double-decker bus from Rome across the country, a 6-hour bus ride, to San Giovanni Rotondo, the place where Padre Pio had resided.
And to make the commitment to get him over to that, to be able to be alive and be a part of that, that wasn't an easy trip to take him over there, but it was so, so important to Uncle Bill, but to the story of their connection.
I feel a responsibility to pass the word along that Padre Pio was no ordinary priest. He's the ultimate priest, and one who can help you as well as he's helped hundreds and thousands of others, and me.
Darling, I can get in a line to you before I board this morning. It is a beautiful morning. Sweetheart, I am glad to be on my way. There are no regrets about going now. I've completed my tour of duty and brought it to a good head.
My uncle died a year and a half later at age 98 and a half. We knew he was toward the end. We had a hospital bed in his house, and Pilar was there to take good care of him. So we get a call one morning early, and she said, "I'm sorry to tell you, your uncle has passed away." Uncle Bill is buried by his wife, my Aunt Ramona, in the cemetery there near Catholic University in the DC area. On June 16th, 2002, John Paul II canonized St. Padre Pio.
An old Monsignor back there in the DC area had seen me one day. He said, "Mr. Carrigan had to go to heaven to make that happen."
Without a doubt, I would say, at least my experience of Mr. Carrigan, it's synonymous with Padre Pio.
The relationship that they had, it gave us all hope that this is something that we can attain. You know, I can pray and still have that deep of a connection. Mr. Carrigan made that real for anyone who was in his presence.
I think that one of the things that's really amazing about our family is my dad is one of many children. He's one of 11 original children, but when we were growing up, he has some half siblings and step siblings. He's never said to us that this aunt is a half aunt, or, we were, to me, when somebody asks me about my family, I say my dad is one of 17 kids, not one of 11, one of 17. Of those 11, I have 64 first cousins, and my parents and my dad's siblings made sure that we were a united front of a family, and every summer we had a family reunion and everybody came, and we really, really, really knew our family. There was always talk about Uncle Bill and Aunt Ramona. There was talk about Padre Pio, and even to this day, I mean, every one of my cousins and our family, we all have this connection to Padre Pio as a patron saint of our family because of what Uncle Bill brought to all of us.
My dear Marilyn found a communique from San Giovanni Rotondo to my uncle after Padre Pio had been informed of the death of my mother. It's Padre Pio was devastated to learn of the tragic death of your sister, and he's praying for you, the father, and the children. And that's me and my siblings.
I've said a couple times, he's the patron saint of our family, but there's not a day that goes by that I don't thank him for what he's done for our family, because I know he watches over us. It's kind of emotional.
I'm leaving on the Seas night and will arrive at Norfolk somewhere around the 21st. The military does not want the families coming to the port. You prepare for me at 4814. I'll see you there. I'd rather it be at home anyway. Darling, I hope you will get this before I get home, and I hope it will give you the lift you have been waiting for. All my love till then, dear. Bill.